Alright, another draft physics video presentation. Fun. So more Puro crap. Doesn't look like we're going to have the conversation because, yeah, he's just going to evade. So if there is anybody who knows anything at all about physics and wishes to defend, your wonderful holy grail, your wonderful holy book of 1/2 mv squared, answer my questions. I'm willing. Anyone. As long as you can do Skype, we have a nice, fair little conversation, and I don't even mind having a penalty. If I say, you're a dumbass or something, you get $5 every time I call you a dumbass, or something like that. I'm fine with that. Let's understand the context. I'm offering $2,000. Maybe Piro's unaware of this, but I have a long time now offer of $2,000 for any channel with more than 100,000 subscribers that is at least a little bit science-based, to have a conversation about physics. And they don't even have to have a conversation. They just have to play a 17-minute video. That's it. Play the 17-minute video. Let me have my opportunity, to talk to your audience and show that your physics is absolute garbage and it can't be defended. Nobody took my money. So if I'm so wrong, Piro thinks I'm completely wrong, totally wrong, I'm out of my mind, I'm just a crazy crank, I'm on some ego trip, all this kind of bullshit. And yet, I'm offering $2,000 for somebody to have fun making fun of me live on the internet. I mean, to have a real spectacle. Because they're going to be so easy to prove me an idiot. It'll be so easy to prove I'm wrong because they'll be able to show all this evidence, all the experiments that prove me wrong. Oh, that's right. They can't show the experiments because if they show the experiments, I'm right. So all they can do is make all these mushy little convoluted answers. They can, just keep evading the subject. So I did think of another way of doing the experiment that really kind of appeals to me. So I'm really kind of want to do it in some way that's like this, just because it would just be so interesting visually. So again, the theory is we have two trains, and we're just going to invert their masses and their velocities. So this one weighs 10 and is going 5. This one is going 10 and it only weighs 5. Their theory says this one has twice as much energy. Twice. So if this one has 250, they say this one has 500 units of energy. Now, Piro thinks energy is squared in some way, like it goes in, you can have a foot of energy, and then you can have a square foot of energy. So somehow you can square the feet of energy. No, I don't think so. Energy is a quantity. A joule is a quantity. It can't be squared, and it can't be linearized. You can't have different forms of the joule. There's no squared version. But anyway, or a watt. You can't square a watt. You can't do any of that. You can't make a flat watt into a squared watt. You can't make a two-dimensional watt into a three-dimensional watt. It's all just a pile of crap. So anyway, their theory says this. And the momentum, Newton's theory says, no, these two things have exactly the same amount of energy. Energy equals same. So their formula completely contrasts with Newton's formula. Complete contrast, completely different answer. Completely different theories of how the universe works. Now, I would propose that the way to find out how much energy they have is to counterforce. So if we had like a little BB gun, and we shot BBs at the BBs are all coming out the same. It's like a little spring gun. So it's always just about the same speed. All the BBs are shot at the same speed. And we just count how many BBs it takes. How many times you have to hit it with a BB to stop it. Their prediction, so I could say, let's say it takes 250 to stop this train. They say it takes 500 to stop this train. Now, I'm saying if we do the experiment, I already know the answer. It's not going to be anything close to that relationship. This one might have a slight advantage, but you can make some some speed arguments, but I still don't think they make any difference. It's going to take the same amount of stopping force, because it was the same amount of starting force. Both of the same explosion creates both of these effects. The same explosion 10 tons going 5 miles an hour and 5 tons going 10 miles an hour. The exact same explosion creates those two effects. And the exact same counterforce will stop them. There's just no plausibility that this, 1/2 mv squared has anything to do with physical reality. It was made by Newton's worst enemy, invented it. It was promoted by a silly woman, doing clay experiments. And that's it. And then it was adopted by Thomas Young, a guy famous for also doing really lame and silly experiments to defend wave theories. These are people that had an agenda. And the agenda was anti-Newton because Newton was just, the Cartesian view of the universe, three-dimensional solid universe. They didn't like the solid universe. And they're just religious kooks trying to kill the solid universe. So that's what you're adopting. Now, of course, that makes sense because you people have adopted all kinds of silly entanglement, all kinds of silly stories they tell you. But this one's overtly paradoxical and silly. There's just no way to make it make sense. I could do the two-train analogy, like I said before. Physics Girl's video, even on the basics, just in her verbiage, you have to concede it's wrong. When she says, the 5 mile an hour 5, the 10 mile an hour 5 combines with another train to become a 5 mile an hour 10. And she said we completely transferred the momentum, and yet we went from 500 joules to 250. Somehow we completely transferred the momentum, yet we lost half the energy to heat or noise or sound or some other kind of crazy crap. It's overtly wrong, and the fact that none of you will admit, well, that was terrible. For her to say that is just terrible, because that can't be true. So, these paradoxes exist. They're nonsense. It's nonsense physics. Plain simple. Like I said, if you really, do any of you people really believe that it will take twice as many BBs to stop this as it will to stop this? Do any of you really believe that? Really believe it, like in your heart. Don't you really don't have some kind of doubt and going, oh yeah, that does sound wacky. Why would it take twice as many BBs when the same force got them both going? How come the same force doesn't stop them? It's got to give you some kind of queasy feeling when you're saying, no, I'm going to keep defending the crazy theory. It takes more force to stop them. Yeah, I'm going to believe that. Twice as much force to stop them. Same force started them, but it takes twice as much force to stop them. You believe that. You think that's logical. So anyway, the very idea that I'm, it doesn't even start its paragraphs with a capital letter. You're wrong. Duh. I got that impression already. That's what you think about what my side believes. Now, I'm right about what the truth is, which is your side doesn't even know the history of this stupid formula. You don't know how horrible it actually is. How really stupid and lame the winning side is. The wrong side won. Just like in the Bohr model, the Bohr model of quantum mechanics, Einstein completely won the thought experiment arguments. Bohr was a babbling lunatic. His responses were insanely stupid. And somehow Bohr won. The wrong side won. Okay. Because you keep mixing up even your own terms. Well, no, I don't. But we are messing with a lot of different experiments. And that's what I should have never done. I should have just stuck with the first one and just said, until we solve this, why even think about other ones? And giving wrong examples. So there's nothing wrong with the examples. So none of you have the courage to draw it. None of you, I'll see no drawings of how you explain where did half the energy go? Completely transfer the momentum. Completely. No energy losses, no momentum losses. Yet I lost half the energy. You can never make that make sense. You can never draw a picture of it. You can never show me where the energy went. Because the only source of energy was in this damn train. You can't, the train had the energy. The 10 mile an hour, 5-ton train had the energy. If it gave all the energy to this, it can't have spilled it anywhere. And giving wrong examples. Again, my examples are perfectly fine. There is no free energy. The implications of your formula, the very fact that you think half the energy could be lost, means that I could gain twice as much energy back by merely crashing the slow car, right? So let's understand. They say this slow car. Well, I mean, I've already done this so many times. You people really do. Well, that light is kind of reflective. Well, I'll hold it this way. So this slow car, right? The one going slower that's heavier. The implication is I lost half the energy. So this one had 500 joules. This one only has 250 joules. But the catch is I can bang this one into a spring. All right? And compress the spring. And then lock the spring at that compression. And then I can put this car back on it. And I'll get all the energy back. Every bit. I'll be back up to 500 again. Now that's free energy, right? If I can put this car, the energy of this car pushes the spring in, and yet I can get 500 back. I can turn 250 joules into 500 joules just by smushing a spring. Yeah, that's free energy. That's pseudoscience, plainly. And that's the direct implication of their formula. Direct implication. It's not a subtlety. It's not a foreign distance. It's not some kind of, convoluted. No, it's a very direct implication of their. As soon as they wrote this 1/2 mv squared, that was the direct implication of it. Free energy. And remember, it was called the living force, implying the existence of free energy. These were free will people. These were people trying to make the universe mushy. All right. No free energy. You seem to think our idea makes there be free momentum. I didn't say that, because I know there's no free momentum. There's no free momentum. The momentum is getting the right answer. Momentum is not in jeopardy here. Your notion of energy is in jeopardy, not momentum. Momentum works. Your theory doesn't. That's the simple, obvious facts here. What you think of as energy. Of course, that's exactly what it is. And I've said it 400. I don't think of it as energy. I know it to be energy. I know it can't be anything else. Momentum doesn't mean anything else. Momentum of electron, momentum of a photon, electron, every single thing moving in the universe only has anything called energy because it has momentum. All that matters is how heavy is it and how fast is it moving. They're both 50-50 partners in creating what we call energy. Just to be confused. No, there's no confusing. Okay, but that kind of thing comes from the fact that momentum is a vector. So this is the hilarious part. They're going to sit there, a vector versus, and has a direction, but energy is a scalar and has no direction. I mean, you can't make, the argument could get ludicrouser. You could say something like, my best friend when I was a kid was a tomato. You could tell some wacky story that's even more silly than this one, but this is about as silly. You can't get much sillier, right? Whether it's the Newton balls, okay, colliding into each other, or it's trains, moving into each other, or whether it's a bullet in a bowling ball example, every single one of them is exactly the same thing. It has a vector in a direction. The motion is in one direction. You can't say, when I said it has 500 joules, I meant it has 500 joules going this way, and this way, this way, this way, this way. No. That's not what you're saying. The energy is in one direction. The train's moving in one direction. All of the momentum is in one vector. Therefore, all of the energy has to be in that same vector. There's no idea that the train has really got, 100 of the 500 joules is going this way, and 74 of the joules is going that way. There's no confusion here. They're exactly the same thing. It's MV. Okay, because you put a square over here and you put a half over here, you can't say, this is a scalar and this is a vector quantity. Bullshit. It's these two things. These little extra numbers are completely superfluous. They don't mean anything. You don't change the nature of the equation by putting those things in. This is a direction. We're always talking about a direction. The energy is in a direction. There's no such thing as energy if it doesn't have a direction. Except in the case, like I said, an explosion. But we know the explosion is in a direction. We know that this little particle is going this way, and this little particle is going this way, and this little particle is going that way. Just like with light. We know the photon's going this way, and this photon's going that way, and this photon's going that way. You can't play this game, vector scalar nonsense. What does that have to do with it? You're saying it has 500 joules. 500 joules of what? Not in a direction? The energy isn't in a direction. Well, yes it is. If I have 500 watts of voltage going through amperage going through a wire, it's going through the wire. It's not going that way, some other way. I mean, what a pile of crap. Let me just read that again. But that kind of thing comes from the fact that momentum is a vector. So again, lots of people keep saying this crap, and it just obviously doesn't mean anything. Clearly, the energy has to be a vector. It's in a direction. It isn't energy if it's not in a direction. If it's not heading for you, it's not energy. Well, anyway, and has a direction. But energy is a scalar and has no direction. Now, can you make any sense out of that? He's saying the train that I just said has 500 joules of energy doesn't have a direction. I mean, absolute nonsense. Total momentum, therefore, can be canceled out. What is that even? How can anybody even make sense that total momentum, therefore, can be canceled out between colliding bodies? Where are the collisions? This collision isn't two opposing forces. It's one train coupling to another train. There's no colliding. I'm not bouncing the bowling ball into the bullets. And none of these experiments have anything to do with collisions. I mean, things opposing each other's momentum. Oh, it just keeps, they just keep cheating and cheating. I mean, you draw it plainly, and they just sit there and ignore it and step right over it and move on to their bullshit. Okay, total momentum, therefore, can be canceled out between colliding bodies. Now, obviously, that's not canceled out. If one body weighs more, or one body has more velocity or more momentum, that body's going to win. It's a tug of war. The more on one side, more force applied on the rope in one direction versus the other direction, it wins. They have to have exactly the same momentum for there to be no winner. And again, even that doesn't, it has to do with whether the energy reflects or whether the energy is broken into little pieces. Anyway, between colliding bodies and their new trajectories. So again, see, this is just such pile. There's no trajectories in here. These are all nice and linear, train track kind of motions. There is no going direct trajectories. Just a pile of shit. The spaceship example doesn't have anything to do with making the spaceship have velocity. It has to do with moving it, changing its orientation. I mean, it's just so frickin'. You're just such a cheater. Okay. Colliding bodies and their new trajectories, a tiny thing can go flying off at a super high speed. Yes, that's exactly what I'm arguing. Tiny thing with super high speed does have momentum, but so does big giant thing at slow speed. Okay, and the fact is that their momentum defines how much energy they have. And the heavy thing is hit barely slows down. So now you're conceding my point. The heavy thing gets hit and it gets barely slowed down by the very small thing moving very fast, because the heavy thing has more momentum. If they have the same momentum, then that doesn't happen. The heavy thing stops and the bullet stops. And the ball can move a lot of energy to a little thing because momentum wise, the little ratcheting object, ricocheting object, is going in the opposite direction of the lost momentum from the big object. So again, he's using collisions. Collisions are complicated. You got to do them right way. That's the whole point why they put Velcro on the trains, and you got to do things to make them stick together and all that kind of crap. We're not talking about being realistically thinking you can shoot a bullet into a bowling ball. I never used that as an example. I never did. I'm saying let's use something more rational as a stopping force than shooting a bullet into a bowling ball. I mean, obviously the bullet's going to fracture the surface of the enamel. It's going to create all kinds of frictions. The bullet's going to deform. You're going to have lots of not perfect exchanging of the energy. So I use the spaceship in the example of just shooting the bowling ball out of one side and the bullet out of the other side. Your equation says the bullet has 100 times, maybe, more energy than the bowling ball. The bowling ball going 10 miles an hour leaving, and the bullet going 400 meters per second. You're saying the bullet, because it goes fast, has more energy. A lot more energy. Hundreds of times more energy. That's nonsense. That's your formula. I already drew all of this, right? So I shouldn't have to redraw it again and just show your formula says, okay, the more I disproportion the mass ratios, so the more I don't have it equal, like 10, 5, and 5, 10, the more outrageous I make the differences. That is, the smaller I make the mass, and the faster I make the velocity, the more insane their numbers get. So again, they're saying the bullet isn't just twice as fast or twice as much energy as the bowling ball. It's 100 times more energy than the bowling ball. Even though I used exactly the same amount of energy to move them. So again, you just ignored the entire subject. Just ignore it. Ignore the points made. Ignore the thought experiments. Ignore everything and just keep doing whatever the hell this is. Ignore the subject. Okay, I won't talk more about it until you understand W equals F times ds. Why do I have to understand any of this horse shit? I don't even know what that means, ds. Okay, so he says he has a definition of work. I said work is the same thing as energy. How much energy you have to do to get something to something else. Now you can call it the work function, but it's the same thing. If I'm trying to move an electron into another electron, the work function is going to be exactly the same as the amount of force I have to apply to get it there. They're going to be exactly the same thing. It's the energy required. Okay? So there's no point in putting a W on one side and an F on the other side, because the F and the W are the same things. I mean, it's just too stupid. Okay, FDS's relation to this. So that's his limitation. If I don't fully embrace his work formula, then we can't have a conversation. And that's fine. Like I said, but see, he thinks force is, if I replace that with momentum, then I have an excuse to put V and M in the equation, because force is going to be, what's force going to be? Force is going to be weight. Weight is going to be what? Momentum. So now I'm right back to the same thing. So I have W equals V times M. And then why would I care about the distance? What does the distance have to do with it? It's superfluous. Well, what's it going to accomplish? Why should I multiply by the distance? I already have the answer. Work equals F, which equals momentum, P. Done. Anyway. And momentum equals weight. And weight equals gravitational force. How much force is being applied? You see, they're all the same thing. Anyway, FD's relation to this, and why a spring has this much energy in a coiled rest ease equals 1/2 kd again squared. So now he's squaring the distance. So they just love halves, and they love squaring distance. So again, it doesn't matter. We know that if I compress a spring to the same exact location, it produces the same amount of energy. A certain number of joules is what it's capable of projecting. It can't make any more energy, and it won't make less. Just like a magnetic field. I can use a magnetic field. I can just take a north side magnet and another north side magnet, and as long as I use the same size magnets, and I push them 1/2 inch away from each other, that's a certain amount of pressure. And every time I go to 1/2 inch, I'll get exactly the same amount of force out each time. Each time is exactly the same. And it doesn't matter if I push it in quickly or I push it in really slowly, I get exactly the same pressure as long as I go that deep. Going that close, 1/2 inch, always the same amount of pressure out. Always. All right. where K is the spring constant. See, so just changing the subject, right? This is all just nonsense. It has nothing to do with anything I've drawn on the board in the last week. Okay, and how D is how far the spring is compressed. Again, we don't care whether the spring is perfectly proportional. That is, you know, I'll get 500 joules by pressing it this far. And then I'll get 750 by going here. And I get 1,000 here. So it's not really a whole equally amounts. It gets more and more stiff as I push it in. It gets stiffer and stiffer, and it starts returning more energy per millimeter. So yeah, the first millimeter, not much energy. The last millimeter, a lot of energy. So what? We know it's always the same amount of energy no matter where I go. So if I go to one location, it's always going to be the same. I compress the spring that far, that's the same. Just like your scale always works. A scale, an old scale that just doesn't use any electronics, just uses a spring, it reliably, day after day after day, gets the right answer. You know, and for little changes from humidity, this and that age, you have to adjust it now and then. But generally speaking, it can go on for years and years and years and accurately measure 100 pounds. Same compression of the spring always returns the same number. So pretending that somehow spring constants have something to do with this is just absolute horseshit. Okay, so then he says, until all the questions in the thread are answered by you. So there's no questions in the thread. There really aren't. There's just like insults and, don't you know what FD means? I mean, that's not a question. That doesn't prove anything. It doesn't demonstrate anything. It doesn't answer any of my questions. So I guess I could just say, until all the questions I've asked are answered by you. But I don't care. I'm willing to show you to be an asshole. So I'm perfectly willing to have the conversation just so I can show everybody you have no answer. I'll show the paradox. I'll say, explain the paradox. And you won't be able to explain it. You won't be able to defend Physics Girl's video. It's impossible to defend because it's nonsense. It's grotesque nonsense. All right. I have no more to say. Okay, pussy. And at that time, I will hear your answers. Oh, Lord Pyrrho. The first is about FD. So again, what is this FD? So again, it keeps bringing up distances. If it has something to do with any of these equations, it has nothing to do with them. The kinetic balls hit, there is no distance. The distance moved by the two balls in terms of changing the acceleration is so minute you couldn't, it's not possible it can mean anything. It has nothing to do with the subject. We already know the thing's velocity. We don't have to ascertain it. We already have velocities. It's just so idiotic. All right. Can I take the thrust, what I apply over distance, the thrust I apply over distance? First is about FD. Can I take the thrust I apply over a distance? So again, he's talking about the ship moving and applying thrust. First off, I'm talking about maneuvering the ship. So all we're talking about is a volume of thrust from the two side little rockets, two little side users. You know, and I'm saying throw bowling balls and throw bullets, but I'm just saying it's from the sides, Pyrrho. And if you're going to measure the amount of time, I've already answered this. The amount of time is a volume. There's still a volume of gas, which is a volume of mass. The ship is losing mass, and it's ejecting the mass at a velocity. And that's all that matters. How much mass, how much velocity. And that's it. There is nothing else. There's no squared and there's no 1/2. Okay. I take the thrust and apply it over a distance, multiply them, and think of what... This is... I can't even read this shit. And multiply them and think of that as using my fuel a certain amount. So again, just it doesn't make any sense. It's a volume of mass. The volume only matters because it has mass. The mass matters because you gave it velocity. And the only thing that's going to matter is its momentum. Where's the squared in this crap? FD. Where's the squared? Where's the velocity squared in that? Shit. You know, there's no point. I mean, this is just, you know, I don't know what to say. I mean, it's going to be demonstrated. Look, you know, the truth eventually is revealed. And I think it's just going to be an incredible blow up, of credibility. When they realize over hundreds of years they just used religious rationalizations, they just sat there and kept evading the subject. I mean, I guess that's how they just talked over the Newtonist, back in the 1700s. All the other countries were playing their superiority game and just talked over it, to evade it, to evade the real subject. And again, I know of no conversation that ever took place in the Royal Institution. This wasn't debated in the Royal Institution. This wasn't debated in any kind of halls of science. It was debated by a bunch of douchebags in Paris. And, obviously the wrong side won. Just like the whole Einstein Bohr debate all happened in private. The public wasn't part of the debate. Nobody got to see the debate. Nobody got to know how this idiotic theory won and the rational theory lost. Shit. Anyway. Yeah, that's enough. Just insufferable. Okay, so I'm still going to do the video on the more elemental stuff that'll really just seal the deal, because you'll really understand how their horseshit is horseshit. You can't make more energy, and you can't lose energy to nothing. You have to lose it somewhere. Okay, you can't just make anyway, I'm just saying, you can't do it. Same explosion, it's going to create the same momentum. It's just a fact, and you have to account for it all. Anyway, fanaticism, very bad thing. This has been a DraftScience video presentation.